oversight of where we are with 31,000 and where we're hoping to head. And just a few statistics. 31,000 has now been adopted as the national standard by 57 countries. So 31,000 is now the national standard in 57 countries. In a whole range of countries in Africa, 31,000 is still being used but hasn't been adopted. But it's quite interesting to see just how quickly 31,000 was adopted globally. You've got the majority of G8, G20 economies, along with the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, India, China and South Africa have all adopted 31,000 as a national standard. It's also being used very extensively within the UN disaster recovery area. And that did surprise me because I was quite concerned that, particularly in Africa, that there wasn't very little in the way of risk being managed in that area. But 31,000 has been used quite extensively throughout Africa. And then we're trying with ISO and the International Electrotechnical Commission, along with the UN, to start to develop some common terminology. Because of course ISO and IEC have been around doing all sorts of standards and developing terms and definitions. And that's turned into a bit of a Tower of Babel because of course a number of standards will use the same term but will give you a different definition. That causes some problems. We've tried to rationalise that within the management system standards, as Frank was mentioning, with NXSL, where again we're trying to get harmonisation at least between the management system standards. The problem with that is that some of these standards committees, particularly the 9,000 and the 14,000, they all agree that harmonisation is a good idea as long as it's harmonisation with their particular standard. And they're the ones that have had the problems with dealing with this whole matter of risk, and yet the newer committees that have written management standards have happily adopted NXSL and have happily adopted 31,000 to enable them to effectively put together the requirements for managing risk within the management system standard. So that's been interesting to see that if you take away from those that have been around for a long time and really feel as though they own management system standards, the newer ones have had no difficulties in following this, and we are getting some harmonisation. But then we've got this whole problem within UN agencies again, who have all been going off doing exactly the same as standards, developing terms and definitions, and then when you start to bring them together to write a document, you suddenly find you have this problem of what are we talking about? What do we actually mean? Because the other problem with terms and definitions is that it's all very well to do it in English or French, or even do it in Russian, but then how does it translate into other languages? So when you look at ISO, we're required to produce standards initially in English, French and Russian. The idea being that you can then translate into any other language from one of those. But of course we find that in English we will have maybe 3 or 4 words that we can use, but then when we go to another language we find that they have one that means exactly the same. So it really is very difficult to develop this harmonisation in terms and definitions, but I think it's vitally important because as we move more and more to a global society, we have this whole problem of how do we understand and communicate with one another. So it is really vital that we continue down this road of trying to sort it out. Now, as Frank mentioned, he's gone off to fight in Working Group 2 that is revising 31,000 to make sure that the German comments are taken note of and beat the others around to his way of thinking. It's been an interesting exercise because the challenge to us is to make 31,000 remain relevant and, if you will, at the cutting edge of managing risk. But it also means that we have the challenge of still trying to keep it as a generic guidance document, not a certification or a management system standard. Now, the technical committee at this point in time is quite opposed to any idea of turning 31,000 into a management system or a certification standard, because quite frankly we don't think it works. It's really, because at the end of the day, risk management is all about people making decisions and making the right decision and then being able to manage it to a successful outcome. Now, I'm not quite sure how you certify those sorts of things in a documented manner. It really is about getting inside people's heads, and I don't think that will work terribly well. So we've got 31,000 being reviewed. ISO TC 56 is also currently reviewing 31,010 with a view to adding some more risk assessment techniques to that document to make it more useful and helpful to you, the practitioner. And then once we've finished with 31,010, if we've introduced some new terms and definitions or changed some terms and definitions, we will in fact then bring out a revised ISO Guide 73, which will be the up-to-date terms and definitions for the management of risk within the ISO world. Now, the problems that we have. How do we start to get people to think a bit broadly? So what we did was we put together the design specification that had a number of inputs. We also ended up with some documents discussing some particular aspects that we saw needed to be addressed. For example, there needs to be a greater discussion on opportunities and the positive side of risk. There also needs to be, I suggest, some discussion on decision making, because at the end of the day that's what risk management is about, or the management of risk is about, is making decisions and being able to ensure that we make the right decisions. And then we put together a rough draft, a committee draft, and we sent that out to our mirror committees. Now, as I said, we have 57 mirror committees, and we've received just over 1,000 comments, which isn't bad. When we were originally writing 31,000, the best we had was nearly 1,700 comments to deal with at one meeting. We've only got 1,000 this time. And we've had a look through them, and we should be able to deal with them reasonably efficiently. And as a result, I would hope to have another committee draft that we can send out that will enable people to see what the revised 31,000 will look like. That should be dealt with later this year at a meeting in September. And at that stage, I would like to think that we will issue a draft international standard, a new DIS for 31,000. And that goes out to all the ISO member countries to enable public comment to be elicited from their various data national organisations. And then that feeds back in. But they also vote, so that gives us an idea of whether we're heading in the right direction and will in fact be able to provide you with a new 31,000. If that all happens according to timetables, that would see a new 31,000 around about the middle of next year at the earliest. Now, as I said, the CD has been out there for 3 months and we've got a lot of comments back. It's quite fascinating to see how comments vary. Because when we look at the committee, the technical committees that we're dealing with around the globe, they range from some that are very high technical expertise in the management of risk, through to some where really buying insurance is seen as a pretty advanced form of risk management. And so you've got to then try and balance the document that you produce so that it is still cutting edge, if you will, for developed economies and major corporations, but it's still helpful for those who are making the first tentative steps down the road to manage risk. And I think if you notice, I emphasise that 31,000 is about helping people to manage risk using a risk management process. But as Frank showed with that diagram, the principles and the framework are very much the management of the business. The principles inform the top management of the board, and then that informs what needs to go into the management system of the organisation in order to ensure that risk is effectively managed. All of the comments are addressed. One of the things is if you make comments when you contribute to the draft international standard, when that comes out, and that should be made available for people to comment on, we do address every comment that's received, providing you tell us the thing that you don't like and what should go in its place. If you just say this paragraph should be rewritten, we will note it and move on. But if you say this paragraph is wrong because, and it should be replaced by these words, then that is considered by the committee with a view to whether it's better or whether it's adopted. So it does give you an ability to get yourself involved at that draft international standard. And as I said, that should be, I hope, later this year, that it would be coming out to the Russian Standards Authority, and there should be a mechanism to enable you to provide comments in. But always remember, if you do comments, tell us what it is that you don't like, why you don't like it, and what words should go in its place. Because unless you do that, nothing will happen. We will just note and move on. So what do I do there? Well, no, I should never be allowed near technology. There we go. Now, we have started to look at other needs that people have raised with respect to 31,000. We produced 31,004, and that provides some further guidance with respect to the principles and the framework, but it doesn't pick up on the process. Because one of the problems that we have when it comes to process is that we really need two books, one for common law countries and one for Napoleonic Code countries, because things that we can do in the common law where we can talk about reasonably practicable efforts to manage a risk, you can't get away with quite as well in Napoleonic, in the European world. So 31,004 takes you down that road, but we also now have some working groups looking at managing disruption-related risk, and that's not business continuity, it's saying how do we deal with disruptions? They can be market disruptions, they can be political disruptions, they can be natural disasters. In the process you will identify some of the things that in fact should become part of your business continuity processes, but there will be others that are very much for the top management of the board to effectively manage. There's one dealing with managing supply chain risk and also managing legal risk. In all cases, it's applying 31,000 to specific activities. And it's very deliberately, the wording is managing disruption-related risk, supply chain risk. It's not supply chain risk management or legal risk management, because that really suggests that it's a different process that you apply, but it's the same process that you then apply, that really is applied to managing disruption, managing legal, managing supply chains. In Australia, we've got handbooks on managing environmental risk, managing outsourcing risk. Again, it's that emphasis of applying 31,000 to specific activities. And I would envisage that we will see documents from those three working groups probably within around about the next 12 months for comment. Now, this whole question of management system standards in certification. As I said before, we've discussed it a number of times, and we really, as a technical committee, are quite opposed to the concept of certification for risk. I know there are some organisations in Europe and in South America that will in fact take your money and give you a certificate and say that you're certified against 31,000. My only comment is ask how good their professional indemnity insurance is, because as soon as something goes wrong with your company, you can guarantee somebody will want to sue you. Now, there is still the opportunity then for national standards bodies, if they really do believe that there's a need for certification standard, to write a new work item proposal and convince enough ISO members to become involved. At this point in time, I don't think it's likely, but certainly I do recognise that a number of countries are very keen on the concept of certification, but I do believe that just being certified doesn't mean that you've got good risk management. As Frank was saying in his earlier presentation, I think when they were doing their review every 3 months, there was a process, there was documentation, you could probably be certified against it. But did they actually manage the risks of the organisation? No, it was all kidding themselves. What I would like to put to you is, particularly with respect to the auditors, is a handbook that we produced in Australia in association with the Institute of Internal Auditors. And I think that's a much better approach, because that's where the auditors sit down and apply 31,000 to your organisation, to the way they will do the audit and the way they will report. And therefore it's designed to provide assurance back to the board that the risk management policies are in place, that the information going up and down the chain of command is accurate and rigorous, and that there are no nasty surprises hiding away in the organisation. So that I suggest is a much more useful approach to ensuring that the board is comforted that risk is being effectively managed, rather than going out for certification. Now, there is also the discussion of, do we need a higher level version of 31,000 so that it's written in the language of multinational companies and government organisations? Within ISO, we have produced a handbook designed for small to medium enterprises using 31,000, and a number of people have said, well, 31,000 as it stands is fine for those that are starting out, but what about those that have been managing risk for some decades, particularly if we look at those that started using the Australian 4360 standard back in the mid-90s. They've been at it now for 20 years. In 31,000 we put that appendix at the back of how to aim for higher things, and that was to help some of those people, but there is a need, some would suggest, for a higher level approach with 31,000. But again, that will require at least one of the national standards bodies to put together a new work item proposal and to get enough people on side. Generally, you've got to get a positive vote for a new item, but you've also got to get at least 10 countries that agree that they should do it and who are ready and willing to provide people to actually work on developing the document. So you can't sit back and say, what a wonderful idea, somebody else can do it for me. No, you've actually got to, as a national standards body, you've got to get people who can be involved. So that's the challenge we've got here with respect to 31,000. If there is enough people that believe we need a higher level document, then they need to put the new work item proposal together and convince their national body. What next? Well, that's up to you, the users of standards. Yeah, we can meet and think about what will we do, but unless you let your national standards body know what sort of standards you need, we can't produce them unless we know what they're there. So it really does come back to you as practitioners to get involved with your national standards body and get them actively looking at providing standards or putting up proposals for international standards that meet your needs. What I've added to this handout, which I understand will be made available to all of you, is a list of a collection of ISO and national documents that relate to standards. And as you can see, there's quite a stack of things around for you to have a look at. So I've added that in there, and all of them are capable of being obtained as PDFs, so regardless of where you go looking for them. But there is a lot out there to help you, and it's only by accessing them that you'll be able to get that help. And on that note, I'm conscious we are running very late. Not late, all right, but any questions in that case?